And let's just dive right in with our prayer before study. I'm sorry, can I get you ladies anything? Do you need a drink or okay. Christ my Lord, the giver of light and wisdom, who opened the eyes of the blind man and transformed the fishermen into wise heralds and teachers of the gospel through the coming of the Holy Spirit, shine also in my mind the light of the grace of the Holy Spirit. Grant me discernment, understanding, and wisdom in learning. Enable me to complete my assignments and to abound in every good work, for to you I give honor and glory. Amen. Most blessed Lord, send the grace of your Holy Spirit on me to strengthen me, that I may learn well the subject I am about to study, and by it become a better person, for your glory, the comfort of my family, and the benefit of your church and our nation. Amen. All right. There is no writing over Thanksgiving, as previously advertised. I will not change my mind. That would be me. And today we are going to talk about a couple of topics. I had you read 2 chapters that don't really go together, but one chapter was short enough that I wanted to put them together. The first topic was traveling in the Middle Ages. Now, let me start with a question. Did anybody here get stuck in the mud on your way here or stuck in a really deep hole, and did you have to get out and push the car out? So glad to hear that. Yeah, did anyone take more than 4 hours to get here? I felt like probably not. Back in ancient Roman times, they had amazing roads. Some of you may know about this. This is one of the highlights of the Roman Empire. They built, some estimates are 10,000 miles worth of roads. And good roads that were paved, not with asphalt, like we do, but with flat paving stones fit together, with drainage ditches on the side, and the road was slightly curved so the water would go into the ditch. It was awesome. So they could travel all over the place. And then there was really no Roman Empire anymore. Some of those roads still exist. Some of those roads are still usable. But a lot of them, 2,000 years is a long time for a road to last. And eventually, new roads were built, but they weren't like those roads. And for most of history since then, traveling has been horribly difficult. I read a story, and this is much later than the Middle Ages, and it was the colonies. It was the American colonies. And somebody, they were going to go to the Constitutional Convention or something. Somebody had to travel from New York City to Philadelphia, which isn't a particularly long trip. I don't know how long it would take us today. Anyway, it took them 10 days to get from New York to Pennsylvania because they kept getting stuck. Because the roads were dirt roads, and every time it rained, it was mud. So this is just one. I've kind of given you one of the answers. The first question I asked you was, what were the main difficulties in medieval travel? Number one, bad roads. And I cannot express to you how bad some of these roads were. Really, really bad. Get stuck and have to spend the night somewhere because you can't get unstuck. Bad. Can somebody give me another problem? Yes, you give me robbers. We have robbers today. We have people that will hijack your car, but cars go really fast, right? And generally, unless your car is stopped, they're not going to run next to your car or get on a horse and run next to your car. But in the Middle Ages, they could, because you're not moving very quickly. And you were traveling through places that might not have a lot of people nearby. And so people got robbed a lot. You wanted to say something, Sean? I hope it's not a story of how you got robbed.
Called bandits.
Bandits. Highwaymen, bandits, robbers. All right. That was a big problem. All right. Elliot had on tolls. What's a toll?
When some city or something takes money from you to cross their road or bridge.
Okay. Right. And why would they do that?
The upkeep of the bridge.
Okay. If go ahead, Easton.
Oh, sorry.
We say that too. That would be the right reason. If you weren't a very nice person, you could just take money because there's no other way to get there. For example, do any of you come to my house from that direction? You cross the train bridge. Okay, so which is obviously not collecting tolls and being kept up because it's really not a very good bridge. If we just decided that that was our bridge and we're just going to charge people for crossing it because we just want money, we could do that. And everybody would have to go around the next road or go up to Orion and around. But what if it was a bridge over a river and there's not another bridge for 30 miles either direction?
They have to do it.
Well, then you kind of have to do it. And one toll isn't so bad. So a couple weeks ago, I drove to Chicago to visit a friend of mine. And I took the toll road. I took 88. So there were 4 tolls to pay between here and Palatine. But it saves me time, and it's a really well kept up road because they collect money. That's not so bad. But listen to this. On the River Loire in France, from Orléans to the sea, no less than 74 tolls had to be paid. Keep in mind, France is not a very big country, right, compared to Illinois or Iowa. Can you imagine paying 74 tolls between here and Chicago? Not 474? I don't think I'd be taking the toll road in that case. That would be very expensive. Yeah, like Elliot said, roads, bridges. So maybe I want to travel and I can't afford it. I can't travel very far in the Middle Ages simply because I can't pay the tolls to the places I want to go. All right. Did anybody find another one? That covers the ones I found. I feel like that's enough. The other problem is, if I want to go very, very far, how am I going to eat on the way? I'm going to need to bring all my own food with me. And where am I going to sleep? And this is the next question I asked you. Where might you spend the night? Give me one place. Elliot, give me one.
Castle.
In a castle. Castles offered hospitality to people passing by. Can you imagine today just being on a trip and you just decide you want to stop for the night and just going up to a house and knocking on the door and saying, hey, do you have a spare room? Can we just spend the night? So that's what people did. Gianna, what was your other one?
Monasteries.
Monasteries. Monasteries were always open to travelers and usually had guest quarters because the vast majority of the monks maybe wanted to be separated from people and not visit with people, and there were certain monks assigned to attend to the needs of visitors. So, yes, where else? There's no castle, there's no monastery. In an inn. In an inn. You're going to love this one. Do you guys remember in the King Arthur book that there was a night when Lancelot and Sir Kay were in the same place? And Sir Lancelot got up and he put on Sir Kay's armor and went out to trick people. How did Lancelot get a hold of Sir Kay's armor? And they were not only in an inn together, where else were they together? They were in the same room, and very likely in the same bed. Can you imagine stopping at a hotel, and they said, yeah, we have a room, you can share it with that guy over there. He'll be sharing your room with you. What? This was just normal. And There's a funny story I read about Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, you probably know, and they were staying at an inn in the same room, and they had an argument about whether or not they should open the window at night. People used to think that sleeping with the windows open was bad for you, that night air made you sick. But Ben Franklin was very progressive and, oh no, the night air is good. And Tom says, we are not opening the window. This is a problem because they're sharing a room. There's a famous novel named Moby Dick. And at the very beginning, there's a guy named Ishmael. And he goes to an inn and he's like, yeah, you can share with Queequeg. He's a cannibal from New Zealand. And in the middle of the night, Queequeg just comes in and gets in the bed. So maybe that doesn't appeal to you. Although, I suspect everyone here has your own bed. My mom slept with her two sisters in the same bed. So it's kind of a luxury to have your own, historically speaking. But at least they knew each other. Well, what if there's no castle nearby, and there's no monastery nearby, and there's no inn nearby, or you don't like the looks of the people you're going to have to share a room or a bed with? Where do you?
Just outside.
Just outside. You just lay down under a tree somewhere and spend the night. Can you imagine doing that now? Are you even allowed to do that now? This is why there are campgrounds. There are places set aside for people to set up their tent because I guess our government, I guess the law takes a dim view of just setting up your tent by the side of the road and sleeping there and then going on your journey the next day. But this was how people did it once upon a time. So for all of these reasons, you would think that people didn't travel very much. Now, I didn't ask you this question, but I'm going to throw it out there. Other than the next question, pilgrimage, can you think of any other reason people might want to travel, farther than you could walk to easily in a day? What's a potential reason, Gus?
Maybe go like trade or.
Okay. So maybe I live in a town and I grow, what do I grow? I grow asparagus. It's not a good example because it's only in season. Well, that one keeps growing if you cut it. So anyway, we're gonna stick with that. And I grow so much asparagus that I've sold it to all the people in my town. So maybe there's a town 15 miles, 20 miles away. And you know what? They love asparagus in that town and they're willing to pay top dollar for my good asparagus. So I go, I load up the cart and I travel and I'm gonna have to spend the night there. I'm gonna have to spend the night on the way and back because the roads are really bad and I have to go very slowly. But if I can make money from it, that might be a reason. Why else might anyone want to travel? If you use your imagination. Think of some of the reasons we travel today. Some of you might be getting ready to travel.
Go to like places, I don't know, historic places.
Okay. So places you're excited to see because you've never seen them. I think this is a wonderful reason to go somewhere. But in the Middle Ages, that would have just been too much trouble, I think. You know what? Pilgrimages. That made up for that. We had another reason to go there, but a lot of people went also because they wanted to see the cool place. What Easton had an idea.
I was gonna say, talk about like what you said, like see like stuff that's cool. It's kind of like almost attractions.
Yeah. I think we should invent a word today for what it's like to go on a pilgrimage, but you only want to go there because something historical happened there. Like going to Plymouth Rock or going to, we don't have a word that means, my trip is specifically designed to see that spot as if it were a pilgrimage, but it's not a religious pilgrimage. John,
Maybe to see family.
to see family. Perhaps your parents married you off to a guy who lives 40 miles away. But every once in a while, you kind of like to see your parents again. So you hitch up the cart and you make the long trip. All right. However, Eliot Easton, the desire to see interesting things, this was often fed by a pilgrimage. What is a pilgrimage? What do we mean? What makes something a pilgrimage? And where might you go? Be brave. I know you wrote something down, yes.
It's like a trip to a holy place.
A trip to a holy place. So it's everything we were talking about. You know, I'm planning a trip to Italy in the spring with my son. And I got to see this, I got to see that, right? And I've got the same feeling, right? I'm just really excited to see these places. But this was a holy place where you want to go for religious reasons, not historical reasons. Why go there? Why go?
Expedite a sinful life, hope of healing, a sense of holiness, desire to worship them.
Okay. Maybe I feel like I am very repentant for some things I have done, and I would just like to go worship at a notable place. Maybe I have been sick for a long time, and there is a certain place known for the healing powers, the religious healing powers are there. Maybe I've just made a vow. I'm going to go on pilgrimage. Are you going to say something, Elliot? Was somebody going to say something? Okay. So where are these places? What kinds of place? Just any place, or?
Places where like saints have been, or big like holy events.
Mm-hmm. Holy events or saints' relics are there, or are connected with a saint in some way. Yeah, Elliot.
The people in the last chapter going to the Holy Land.
Yes. Oh, that's very good. Very good. Let's read that. This is a very sad ending, wasn't it? We'll talk about this in a minute. Oh, here we go. And when Lancelot was buried, Sir Hector and Sir Bors, Sir Blamore and Sir Bleoberis, the only knights left, living of all the fellowship of the Round Table, set forth on pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and there ended their days. Because it was just so ghastly what had happened to the Knights of the Round Table, to the Fellowship of the Round Table. So one place you could go where the knights went, Jerusalem. That's a long way away. If you don't want to go quite so far, you could go to Spain. St. James of Compostela, Spain. But picture this. Say you have a family. Say you are a shopkeeper or a blacksmith or whatever, and you're supporting family. And you say, I'm going to go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and I'll be gone for the next year. What are you going to have to do with your shop? I'm just going to have to close it, which means what's not going to happen while you're gone? You're not going to make any money. Your family's not going to be able to buy food. Or say you have a family and you say, hey, guys, see you later. I'll be back in a year. I'm going on a pilgrimage. What? This is a really long trip. So be patient with me. I brought my world map up for reasons. We used to have this on a wall. So. Oh, could you hold the other end, Grace? Awesome. Okay, so here we actually only need this part. But just to give you an idea, so just look on the map of the world. Look how far they're going. this is an enormous trip. Either you're sailing, if you find a safe ship, or you're walking all the way there, like the Crusaders did. So if you are in Northern Europe, going to Spain is a lot shorter. But if you are in Britain, we'll just drop this on the ground. We're going to use it again later. If you are in Britain, though, there's a much closer place for you to go because there's a much closer saint. Does anybody remember who that saint is? Who can we?
St. Patrick?
Oh, no, that would be really good. But not St. Patrick. I don't even know if there is a cathedral or a place dedicated to St. Patrick. I'm not sure about that. It's a guy who died defending the church that we read about not very many weeks ago. And you could go to Canterbury Cathedral. And if you're living anywhere in Britain, you could probably do this in a couple, 2-3 weeks tops. Go there and back. It was the Cathedral at Canterbury to visit the relics of Thomas Becket. Thomas Becket. So just to remind you guys, King Henry II made Thomas Becket the Archbishop because he was a buddy. And he said, I'll do anything I say. But then he didn't. He didn't do anything he said. He kept arguing with him. And Henry said, hey, I want so-and-so to be a bishop. And Thomas Becket said, I don't think so, because you're not allowed to make bishops. The church does that. So one day Henry was trotting around in France on his horse with a few knights, and he was stewing about this. And he said, who will rid me of this troublesome priest? Remember this? And the 4 guys heard him, and he said, oh, that's code for go take him out. And he did. Right there, before Vespers, at the altar. It's awful. And almost immediately, people started visiting it on pilgrimage to go pay their respects to Thomas Becket and pray there and revere him as a martyr who was defending the church. So many British people would go on this particular pilgrimage. It was very doable. We are not going to write over Thanksgiving, but we are going to do some reading. And one thing that we are going to start reading is this book, the Chaucer Storybook. Geoffrey Chaucer was a medieval author, and he also had a day job as a government official. But he wrote many books. And he said, I'm going to write a bunch of stories. I wonder how I could organize these stories. I know. I'm going to write a book about a group of pilgrims going to Canterbury. And there's going to be a miller and a knight and the knight's son, who's a squire. And let's get in a student. And let's bring in, a lady who's been married 5 times, and she's been to pilgrimage everywhere, and she's seen the world. Let's bring a prioress in. She's all dainty, and she, pats her mouth with a napkin. She's a little lap dog and everything. And he brings in all these characters. And in this book, they all are heading to Canterbury, and they all end up at the same inn. And the guy who owns the inn, and this is the chapter 1 at the Tabard Inn, his name's Harry Bailey. And Harry Bailey sees them all, and he says, you look like a fun group. I like you people. Here's the deal. I'm just going to let everybody else, my family, run the inn for a few weeks. I'm going to go to Canterbury with you guys. And here's what we're going to do. Everybody tell 2 stories on the way there and 2 stories on the way home. And then we'll vote who told the best story. And whoever wins, all the rest of us have to buy their dinner and their night at the inn when we get back. Does everybody agree? We'll do it. This is great. So they start out the next morning, and in this book, Harry Bailey calls on the characters in turn. Hey, it's your turn to tell the story. And they tell the story. This book is called the Canterbury Tales. because it's a group of tales told by people on their way to Canterbury. Chaucer did not finish it. If there were 2 stories from each one, and there's 29 of them, this would be a lot of stories. And he died before he finished all the stories and put them all in order. But we have what's left of it. This is a collection of an introduction and 9 stories from the Canterbury Tales. They're not connected to each other, right? It's like the Arabian Nights, right? It's not a single story. It's just the people telling their stories. But each of their stories has something to do with who they are. So, for example, the knight tells a very knightly story of knights in armor and that sort of thing. All right, so over break, I would like you to read chapters 1 through 6 of the Chaucer storybook. They're very entertaining stories, and they're not that long. It's half this book. Okay? So that's I'll put that on the board. Chaucer storybook, chapters 1 through 6. And just keep in mind, it is a group of people going on pilgrimage. Oh. I better not say that. As I say, I think you might run into a familiar. Oh, yes, you will. I'm pretty sure in there. You might run into a story that sounds very familiar. We'll see. So, just to finish out the pilgrimages, Dorothy Mills also says there was adventure and restlessness that led to people going on pilgrimage. All right. I want to read one more destination and see if it rings a bell. Pilgrimages were made to Glastonbury, founded, according to the legend, by St. Joseph of Arimathea. What does this remind you of? What is this connected to? Why would I read that particular one to you? King Arthur, because King Pelle said he was a descendant of Joseph of Arimathea, and Joseph of Arimathea had brought the Holy Grail to England, and there was a shrine to St. Joseph of Arimathea at Glastonbury. Okay. Those are shorter term trips, except for Jerusalem. How about some very long-term travel? Who is Marco Polo? Not a pool game. Or, yes.
He is the son of Niccolo Polo, who traveled to China.
And why did Niccolo travel to China? Because there's an emperor there, and they just, they're traders. They're doing it for merchant purposes. They were from Venice. I had to skip this section in Dorothy Mills, but Venice at this time in Italy. And you might know Venice is the famous city in Italy that's canals instead of streets. Venice was the place to go to buy and sell things, especially things that came from the East. And so you might remember last week we talked about a crusade that never made it to the Jerusalem, and they stopped in Constantinople and just burned it down, and they were all going to Venice. That's where they bought their boats, and then they couldn't afford it. So these guys were Venetian, and they just kept traveling a little farther and farther afield until they made it all the way to China. So this is, again, Grace and I are gonna, because this is just amazing to me. They're from Venice. Venice is right here. Guys, I don't even know what to say about that. On foot, on horseback, with donkeys. This is a really long way. You know, the Himalayas are here. There's mountains, there's enemies. I was looking to see if I can find the key. Here we go. This is 1,000 miles. So at least a trip across the United States. It's roughly 3,000 miles from side to side, maybe a little more. Thank you. And Niccolo and his brother, here, I'll fix it later. Niccolo and his brother spent some time talking to the king there, Kublai Khan. Does anybody know another Khan? Genghis Khan, right? The notorious, scary, like a sort of Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun get lumped into the same category. Khan is what they call their ruler, right? Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, it's the title. So this is not Genghis Khan, this is Kublai Khan. And he spent some time talking to these Venetian traders. He was very interested in them. And I didn't ask you this question, but does anybody remember what he was particularly interested in? He wanted to hear more about something.
Wasn't it like
Christianity. He said, "Ah, I've never heard anything about this religion before. I really want to know more." He said, "Can you go back? I'd love you to go home and talk to this Pope and ask him to get a group of 100 missionaries together and send them to me so he can teach my people about the Christian religion." And the brothers said, "Sure." So they traveled all the way, several thousand miles home, and the Pope was dead. And they hadn't elected a new one yet. But they did gather together some friars who were willing to go with them, and Niccolo's son, Marco, who was 17 years old, and took him with them. And they spent the next 20 years with Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan. I did it myself. Says, Marco himself says, Marco was held in high estimation and respect by all belonging to the court. He learned in a short time the manners of the Tartars, the people there, and acquired a proficiency in 4 different languages, which he became qualified to read and write. Finding him thus accomplished, his master was desirous of putting his talents for business to the proof, and he sent him on embassies. Marco was a special ambassador of the Khan to India, all over China, for 20 years. Well, eventually, people get homesick, you know, even if you're in a really cool place. And eventually, the Polo family really would like to go home. And Kublai Khan, he wasn't mean. He wasn't holding them there by force. I mean, he really liked their services and he liked talking to them. But he said, "Yes, I understand. Go with my blessing. Here's a bunch of gold and jewels and rubies and stuff as a gift." Well, then they set off on the several thousand-mile trip home. Of course, they've been gone 20 years. And I don't know about you guys, but when I go on vacation, especially that last push heading home, by the time I get home, I don't look so good, right? You just kind of stop caring about what, you know, when you leave on vacation, your hair's all nice. And when you go home, you just, you know, you're just tired of it all, right? Your clothes are all dirty and you just want to be home. So by the time they stumbled into Venice, they weren't at their best. They were tired. And then they'd been gone 20 years. Remember, Marco was 17 when he left. He was 37 years old. He's almost 40-year-old man when he comes home. People don't recognize them. And in Venice, well, who are you? Well, we're the Polos. No, you're not. You sure? Well, I kind of see it. You know, you need a shower and a shave, maybe, and I could tell who you are. Where you been? Well, we've been in China with the Great Khan. Oh, yeah. That's a likely story. Really. And the story is that they said, oh, yeah, we have been, and we can prove it. And they opened up the lining of their coats into which they had sewn the gold and the jewels and diamonds and things. And they just scattered them out on the ground, and everybody was just amazed. Well, I don't know about you, but if I'd been gone for 20 years, I'd like to put my feet up and maybe have a cup of tea and catch up on the local news. But not Marco. He found out that Venice was at war with Genoa, another Italian city, because at that time, Italian cities like to fight each other. So he just went to war. Unfortunately for Marco, he got captured and put in prison as a prisoner of war in Genoa. They didn't want to kill him because they wanted money, right? They want his family to pay for him. But he's sitting there and he's just passing the time, you know, and he starts chatting with people. I remember when I was serving the Great Khan. And I'm like, what? You did what? Oh, yeah. I have loads of stories. And the daughter of the guy in charge of the prison listened to this one day. She said, buddy, you've got to write this down. Let me get you paper, pens, anything you need. You got to write this down. And lo and behold, he did. And we have the travels of Marco Polo. Some of it's kind of boring. And it took me X number of days to get from here to there, and there's the kind of trees that I saw. I mean, unless you just really like travel books. But I did mark a couple of things that I want to read to you that are a little more amusing. Before I do, though, this was around the year 1300, 1300-ish. About 150 years later, there's going to be a young boy, also Italian, and this is going to be his favorite book. And it's going to inspire him to go exploring. And that little boy is Christopher Columbus. This was his favorite book. So everything's connected, right? The fact that the Polos went to China, and then Marco came back, and he got in prison, and he wrote this book. And then later, another boy picks up this book, and he's all excited, and he devotes his life to finding new places, and it leads to the discovery of the New World. Crazy. All right. Here are my favorite parts of the travels of Marco Polo. All right. We're going to all, I was going to say, after I read one, we'll vote whether we believe Marco or not. I'm not sure why he would just make things up, but some things are a little hard to believe. However, just because I haven't seen it, does that mean it's not true? Right. This one, though, this first story, I think it reminds me of something we've already read this year. Okay. This desert is reported to be so long that it would take a year to go from end to end. And at the narrowest point, it takes a month to cross it. It consists entirely of mountains and sand and valleys. There is nothing at all to eat. But I can tell you that after traveling a day and a night, you find drinking water. Not enough water to supply a large company, but enough for 50 or 100 men with their beasts. And all the way through the desert, you must go for a day and a night before you find water. And I can tell you that in 3 or 4 places, you find the water bitter and brackish. But at all the other watering places, that is 28 in all, the water is good. Beasts and birds there are none, because they find nothing to eat. But I assure you that one thing is found here, and that a very strange one, which I will now relate to you. The truth is this. When a man is riding by night through this desert, and something happens to make him loiter and lose touch with his companions by dropping asleep or some other reason, and afterwards he wants to rejoin them, then he hears spirits talking in such a way that they seem to be his companions. Sometimes, indeed, they even hail him by name. Often these voices make him stray from the path so that he never finds it again. And in this way, many travelers have been lost and have perished. And sometimes in the night, they're conscious of a noise like the clatter of a great cavalcade of riders away from the road. And believing that these are some of their own company, they go where they hear the noise, and when day breaks, find they are victims of an illusion and in an awkward plight. And there are some who, in crossing this desert, have seen a host of men coming towards them, and suspecting that they were robbers, have taken flight. So having left the beaten track and not knowing how to return to it, they have gone hopelessly astray. Yes, and even by daylight, men hear these spirit voices, and often you fancy you are listening to the strains of many instruments, especially drums and the clash of arms. For this reason, bands of travelers make a point of keeping very close together. Before they go to sleep, they set up a sign pointing in the direction in which they have to travel. And round the necks of all their beasts they fasten little bells, so that by listening to the sound they may prevent them from straying off the path. Do we have any explanation for this? Would we like to debunk it?
Should be like, it like give you like the sound of like the wind or something, or they're just like going crazy and hearing stuff.
Okay. Those are both feasible. Hail them by name. That doesn't sound like just the wind. Although, have you ever thought you heard voices? You know, when the wind is blowing, weird noises? This is true. What is your idea, Elliot?
Made from like
Maybe. Does the beginning of his story sound very feasible? This desert is very, very far, and you go a day and a night between oases. There are 28 of them, and some of them the water's not so... This sounds very matter-of-fact, like you would write if you'd been on a journey. But then suddenly we have spirit voices. Can you think what this reminds me of? I told you it reminds me of something we've read. Spirits in the desert. Deserty areas with supernatural creatures in them. It sounds like genies from the Arabian Nights to me. If it is wind or an illusion, have we found the source of genies? Anyway, but Marco believes this is true. All right. This one's a little bit harder to swallow. You're going to have trouble explaining this one away. You give it a shot. Andaman is a very big island. The people have no king. They are idolaters and live like wild beasts. Now let me tell you of a race of men well worth describing in our book. You may take it for a fact that all the men of this island have heads like dogs and teeth and eyes like dogs. For I assure you that the whole aspect of their faces is that of big mastiffs. They are a very cruel race. Whenever they can get hold of a man who is not one of their kind, they devour him. They have abundance of spices of every kind. Their food is rice and milk and every sort of flesh. They also have coconuts, apples of paradise, and many other fruit different from ours. What are we going to do with dog-headed men?
They could be wearing masks.
They could be wearing masks. That's actually not bad. What do you got, Easton?
They could be like people that have like really big beards, or like I thought of one was gorillas.
Oh, yeah. Oh, probably not rice and milk with the gorillas, but you know, there's actual. I'm not joking. I'm not making this up. I couldn't make this up. There are so many stories in various places of dog-headed men. There's actually a word that means cyno. This will be your word for the day. Cynocephalus. It's Greek. Kunos means dog, and kephale means head. So it's cynocephalus means dog-headed. My son, grown up, mind you, and in the military, just last year sent me some article, linked to an article online about the cynocephalus men of somewhere. What are you reading? Masks, beards, this is not bad. And here's why. So if this is 1300-ish, only a couple hundred years later, we have, it's after Columbus, and we have all those voyages of discovery, right? And okay, here, I'm not going to get the map because it's falling apart. So the trips below South America, right? Here's North America, South America. And when they came from Europe and then going through South America, when they got to the tip of South America, one group of travelers reported giants with enormous feet. They had weirdly enormous feet. And it turns out on more research that, you know, the tip of South America is pretty close to Antarctica. Sometimes we don't think about this unless we're looking at a map. It gets very cold there. And apparently, instead of boots, they wrapped their feet in leaves and whatnot and wrapped it all around. And of course, imagine that instead of boots, and it gave them these enormous feet. So they thought they were giants with enormous feet from a distance, but actually it was just stuff wrapped around their feet. So I like this idea that they were wearing masks or just had, some people just have really heavy beards and long hair. You guys are nicer than me because I thought maybe they were just really ugly. You guys are much nicer than me. Okay. Weird story number 3. This one should ring a bell. Okay. Okay. These more southerly islands, which men do not willingly visit because of this southward drift, are very numerous. And it is said that they are inhabited by griffin birds, which make their appearance here at certain seasons of the year. But you must know that they are by no means such as men in our country suppose, or as we portray them, half bird and half lion. According to the report of those who have seen them, let me stop there. According to the report of those who have seen them. Has Marco seen them? He's reporting what other people have said. That's always important to note. It is not true that they are a blend of bird and lion, but I assure you that these men, the actual eyewitnesses, report that in build they are just like eagles, but of most colossal size. Let me tell you first what these eyewitnesses report, and then what I have seen myself. They report that they are so huge and bulky that one of them can pounce on an elephant and carry it up to a great height in the air. Then it lets it go, so that the elephant drops to earth and is smashed to pulp. Whereupon the griffin bird perches on the carcass and feeds at its ease. They add that they have a wingspan of 30 paces, and their wing feathers are 12 paces long, and a thickness proportionate to their length. Okay, Elliot remembers. Easton, do you remember? What is it?
It's, I think
A
it's
rock.
Isn't that one from Sinbad?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Sinbad, on one of his misadventures, ends up on an island. Do you remember the one where he got down the big snakes and the diamonds were down there and people threw the meat and the rock came and picked up the meat and he tied the meat to his back? Yes. How do I want to say this without sounding crazy? Do you think it means something? Let me ask it this way. What could it mean? How could we explain that? Arabic peoples described this huge bird that can pick up a human being or whatever. And Marco Polo, not related in any way to these Arabian people, took a trip and he said, oh, they say that there are these huge birds that can pick up an elephant. What are some of the options we have? There's a lot of options. I'll give you one. They're both it's just nonsense, and everybody's making it up, and just big birds sounds cool, so several groups of people made up stories about big birds. This is the most pessimistic option. What's your option, Gianna? Unless it's that one.
Maybe it was somewhat right.
In what way could it be right?
There could have been a very big bird. I doubt there was one big enough to pick up an elephant per se, but there's been birds that have been big enough to pick up people before.
So maybe it's based on fact, which means that the Arabic people and Marco Polo could have both gone back to the fact, and it was exaggerated. What's another option? It's kind of crazy sounding, but don't be afraid. Maybe there are really enormous birds, or there was. Just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean it doesn't never exist. This is what makes history so hard. You know, we weren't there, we don't know. We suspect there were not birds big enough to carry off elephants. We kind of think maybe not. When two groups of people tell the same sort of story, does that make you feel like it's more likely to be true, or at least based in fact, or less likely? It certainly seems more likely to me that it could be true. This is very interesting to me. Okay. That is the story of Marco Polo. I have one more thing, though, I'm going to throw in before we talk about the friars. And it's only distantly related to this subject, but everybody loves the story, so I'm going to tell it. There is a famous poem about Kublai Khan and his palace at Xanadu. All right? And the story about the poem is maybe more entertaining than the poem. The poem's kind of longish, so I'm only going to read a little part of it to you. But here's the story. The poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge had a habit that at his time many poets had. He used some drugs, I'm just going to say. Opium, pretty much. And it makes you sleepy. It also makes you see things. All right? Gives you weird dreams. It was a thing once upon a time. Do not. But this is what Coleridge did. And the story is one day, he may or may not have had some opium, and he fell asleep, and he started dreaming, and when he woke up, he realized he had dreamed a poem. I wish I would have dreams like that, but no. He dreamed a poem, and he ran. We know what it's like, right? You know, when you first wake up, you can remember what you dreamed? And it seems so real, and you think, I won't forget. But if you don't write it down right away, later you go to tell somebody, and you think, rats. I know it had this and this in it, but I can't remember anything else now, and it disappears. So he knew this. So he grabbed pen and paper, and he started furiously writing down his poem, which is great, except suddenly somebody knocks at the door. And he just tries to ignore it. They won't go away. And finally, like, all right, I'm just going to get rid of this guy. So he goes to the door really fast, and it's nothing. It's some minor business question. Could have waited, not important at all. But when he came back, he couldn't remember the rest. So all we have, it just ends very abruptly because all we have is, So it's called Kublai Khan. And so I'm just going to read the very beginning and the very end. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's really pretty. And it sounds a bit like somebody might dream this if you were on drugs. In Xanadu did Kublai Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph the sacred river ran, through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground, with walls and towers were girdled round, and there were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree, and here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. That's the beginning, and this is the end. A damsel with a dulcimer in a vision once I saw. It was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abora. Could I revive within me her symphony of song, to such a deep delight 'twould win me, that with music loud and long, I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, beware, beware, his flashing eyes, his floating hair. Weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honeydew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise. And that's enough about Marco Polo. Let us talk about friars. What is a friar? And how are they different from monks? Yes, Elliot.
It's kind of like a monk, but they're not just in the monastery. They're like among the people.
Mm-hmm. They travel around. Monks stay put. Friars travel around. And usually because they are in some sort of service to others. We read about 2 groups of friars that were started right about the same time, around the year 1300. The first was started by Francis of Assisi, Saint Francis. And I asked you, what things did Saint Francis value most highly besides God? What is he devoted his life to? Besides God. Yeah, Gianna.
Spiritual gladness.
Okay, gladness, first of all. Saint Francis is a saint of just total and utter joy. He is just thrilled with being alive, and he's thrilled with all the other things that are alive here with him. He's just thrilled to be here. What else did he love? He loved it so much he said he married it. Poverty. Do those 2 things usually go together for people today? Oh, we kind of think if you're poor, it makes you feel more miserable. And if we could be rich, we'd be really happy. But is that really true? I mean, is every rich person in the world very, very happy? No. Is every poor person in the world really, really sad? Saint Francis was, his dad was pretty wealthy. He was the son of a merchant, an Italian merchant in Assisi. And he just kind of got in his head he wanted to use some of that money to help people. And his dad sold fine cloth, that purple-dyed cloth that was very expensive. And Francis was working at his shop, and he saw a man in need, and he just gave him some of the cloth. His dad said, "What are you doing? What are you giving stuff away for? You can't do that." And Francis said, "You know what? I think that's why we're here, to help people in need. In fact, if you don't like me behaving that way, I'm going to renounce all my inheritance. I don't want your money, Dad. In fact, I don't want anything you have given me." And the story is, quite shockingly, he just went ahead and took off his clothes, because his clothes belonged to his dad, and said, "Here you go. I'm done. I'm done with that sort of life. Scrimping and saving and trying to make a buck selling goods to people." So he went out in the woods, and there was this old chapel, old church that was kind of fallen down because nobody had been taking care of it. And St. Francis thought he heard, in a dream or waking, not clear, he thought he heard a voice telling him, "Rebuild my church. Build up my church." He said, "Oh, okay. Well, this church has fallen down, so I'm just going to start gathering rocks and building the church." And eventually some people saw what he was doing, and they started joining him. But later, he said he realized that wasn't really what his job. It was rebuild the church, not a church building. And so Francis roamed around asking people for the food that he needed. If you gave him more than he needed, he'd just give it away. If you gave him an extra cloak, he would just give it away to somebody who he thought needed it more. And, okay, was it you, Gianna, that answered first when I said, what does St. Francis love more? What was your answer again?
Spiritual gladness.
Spiritual gladness, okay. Yes. One thing that made him glad was the animals. And so you may have already encountered this at some point. His Canticle of the Sun. I'm not going to read the whole thing because you read it in Dorothy Mills, but I'll just read a couple sections. Praise be to my Lord for our sister the moon, and for the stars, that which he has set clear and lovely in heaven. Praise be my Lord for our brother wind, and for air and cloud, calms, and all weather, by which thou upholdest life in all thy creatures. Praise be my Lord for our sister water, who's very serviceable to us and humble and precious and clean. Praised be my Lord for our sister, the death of the body, from which no man escapeth. That's odd. Praise be this for the sun, the moon, the water, fire, the earth. Death. I thought death was a bad thing. Isn't death our punishment for sin? Why do you think St. Francis would include that? What do you think, Julie?
Because there's a life without death.
Because if I lived forever, am I a sinful creature? I assure you I am a sinful creature. Don't be afraid to say I'm a sinful creature. All of us are, right? Because I'm human. I'm human. What if I lived forever and stayed this way forever? It would be awful. You know, it's a punishment, but it's a blessing, because we wouldn't want to live like this forever. Just like Paul says in his letter, who will rescue me from this body of death, right? He said, I'd rather go be with Jesus, but I'll stay as long as he wants me to stay. So St. Francis included everything that was a part of creation he loved. So much so that he is said to have had a special relationship with the animals. Once upon a time he was trying to preach to some people, and there were some birds in the trees, and you know, sometimes they can get a little loud, depending on the type of birds. The starlings around here, you know, those trees full of starlings, and they just chatter and chatter, and it's just deafening. Well, these birds were making such a racket, and the people couldn't hear. And the story is that St. Francis went over and he said, Brother birds, you have been talking for a very long time, and now it's my turn. You need to just be quiet for a little while and let me talk. The story is that they were quiet and let him talk. There is a chapel in Assisi, in Italy, and it's devoted to St. Francis, and they had a painter, a well-known painter of the time, come and paint scenes from the life of St. Francis. And I want to show you one of them, but first I want to show you another picture. All right, let me get these. Okay, first I want to look at this picture. Well, I'll hold it up. We might go ahead and pass it around, but maybe I'll just walk around. I want you to look at this, and I want you to look at, by the way, it's the Nativity, because Mary's in the middle, and Jesus is in the manger, and Joseph's here, and the two of the prophets. It's Moses and Elijah. I think it's Moses. Isaiah and Ezekiel, sorry. Isaiah and Ezekiel. But I want you to look at Mary compared to all the other figures. I also want you to look at the angels that are on the above it. And just tell me if it seems sort of real to life to you or not so much. If anything strikes you as odd or... Ladies, look. Is it brighter? Can you see? first of all, what about Mary? Is there anything that strikes you as odd about Mary compared to all the other figures? Yes, Elliot.
The biggest one.
She's enormous compared to everyone else. So, unless she's a giant or they're all very, very tiny people, this is not really true to life. How about those angels piled on the roof? Does it kind of look like they might fall off? There's not really room for their bodies to be there. They're just heads piled on heads piled on heads. What kind of colors stand out to you? Just name one color that you see a lot of. Blue. Blue and purple, royal colors. What's another color that just hits your eyes?
Yellow.
Yellow, gold. What do you think gold could stand for? Crowns and riches and treasure. There's some red like blood, like death that is in the future for Jesus. So it's color coded. Do you think the sky was actually gold when Jesus was born? No, I don't think so. So it's not meant to say this is what it looked like if I took a picture. It's meant to say the most important thing going on here that I want to direct your eyes to are Jesus and Mary. So I'm going to make her big to attract your attention. And just the fact that there's an angelic host surrounding, we're not going to worry too much about the logistics of how they all fit there because it's symbolic. Okay, so this was painted, maybe 20, 30 years before the painting I'm going to show you next, okay? This is the painting of St. Francis on the wall at Assisi. And he is talking to the birds. Is there anything inappropriately sized, first of all, in this painting?
What? Yeah, the tree looks like half the.
Well, the tree does not look super big, but there are trees that aren't very big. So it's hard to say. The tree is bigger than he is. How about him in comparison to the size of the birds? It's not an enormous Francis, right? How about the two people? One of them is Francis, and he has a companion. If Francis is the most important one in here, if I were this artist, what size would Francis be compared to the other person? Way bigger. This painting is symbolic. This painting is portraying a scene. An actual scene from the life of St. Francis, the best it can. Look at the clothing. We have this bright symbolic clothing, just the drab cloak of a friar, nothing rich. The only thing we do have one thing in this that's symbolic. There's something that you wouldn't have seen if you had been there. The halo around Francis. The reason I'm making a big deal about this is this. The guy who painted this was the teacher of the guy who painted this. Duccio and Giotto. Giotto, we're going to meet him. You do not have to write this down or even remember it, but sometimes these strange Italian names, if you don't see them written, you don't really know that you know that. That's what it's spelled like, Giotto. This is around the year 1300 again. He's considered the beginning of the Renaissance. Because Duccio, his teacher, is still kind of doing a symbolic, Byzantine, stiff, formal, posed. And Giotto has decided, no, I'm going to paint it more what it would have looked like. So for the rest of this semester, but mostly next spring, we're going to be looking at a series of artwork because we're going to be talking about the Renaissance, right? And this is a real shift in how they produced art. And this is the beginning of it. It just so happens it's of St. Francis, which is cool. All right. So St. Francis was concerned with nature, and he was concerned with teaching people that your joy is not in riches. Now, there was a second friar we read about, St. Dominic. What was of greatest importance to St. Dominic besides God? What is St. Dominic? Look. Teaching and preaching. You know what? Francis said, book learning is not important at all. I don't care. I don't care about books. I just want to be out in nature and be with people and love creatures and do God's work. Dominic said, oh, book learning is so important. It's the number one thing, because if we don't learn the truth, we can't teach other people the truth. So learning and teaching is so important, because if people don't know the truth, they will fall away and believe lies. And this was actually happening in the time of St. Dominic. There were a group of people in southern France, the Albigenses. They believed some odd things. They were heretics. They were a Christian heresy. And Dominic said, why is this happening? I think these people just aren't learning the truth properly. We need to get people out there and do classes and teach people in churches the truth about God. So Dominic devoted himself to teaching the truth and shooting down the heresies, right? Arguing against the things the heretics were teaching. So he got a group of people around him, and they had a nickname. First of all, because his name was Dominic, they were called Dominicans. The Dominicans. The Franciscans were the followers of Francis. The Dominicans are the followers of Dominic. But because they were just really intense, right? We're studying all the time, and then we're just going to prove to you why you're wrong, and we're going to teach you the truth. They got the nickname Dominicanes, which is Latin for the dogs of God. Like watchdogs, right? That'll chase away people who aren't teaching the truth. So this was a little joke based on his name. This is interesting to me. Which one do you think is more important? How can I say this? Focusing on God and nature and caring for the poor, or focusing on teaching the truth to people and making sure they understand the truth? Which one chose the better course, Francis or Dominic? They're both saints of the church. So what does that tell us right there? Somebody thinks what? If they're both saints.
That they both were right.
They both were right. It's kind of a trick question, isn't it? Do we all have the same calling? We don't. The Bible is very clear. It says some are called to be teachers, some are preachers, some are healers, some have gifts of knowledge and healing, and we have different gifts. And it's really interesting to me that at the same time in history, Francis and Dominic spring up. And one of them says, you know what? I'm just going to go out, I'm going to give away all my possessions, and I'm going to roam around and just love on animals and take care of poor people, and every time I get something, I'm just going to give it away. I'm going to sleep outside and just be happy. Be silly happy for God. And Dominic came and he said, oh, we got to learn the truth, people. We have to be diligent in our study, and we have to make sure people understand and are well taught. And the church at the same time said, both of you are right. We just have different gifts and different talents, and we need them both. So I say this to myself a little bit because I'm a little more Dominic than I am Francis. I'm not very Francis. Maybe some of you are very Francis and not very Dominic. So maybe we need to watch our balance, right? Be a little more balanced. All right. Any other comments before we turn our attention to King Arthur and its sad ending? There is a reading also from Dorothy Mills for you to do over Thanksgiving. It is in your reading guide, chapter 18, but only part 1. It says that right in your reading guide, and chapter 19. Don't read all, well, you can read all of chapter 18 if you want to, but you don't have to. And that's your assignment over break. All right, let us turn our attention to King Arthur. What happened to bring down King Arthur's knights? What's the instigator? What was it, Ellen?
Like Lancelot and Guinevere and Aaron's brother.
It was Lancelot and Guinevere. We knew it. We'd been warned. If this took you by surprise, it probably shouldn't have, because we'd been warned over and over through this book. Lancelot even was told flat out he couldn't come to the Holy Grail. He couldn't go in the room with it at the end because he had failed. He had failed in morality on that point on Guinevere. But, like I said, there was another factor, and it was Mordred. Who is Mordred? Who is Mordred's mom? Did anybody catch who Mordred's mom was?
Wasn't it Morgan Le Fay?
Morgana Le Fay is Mordred's mom. And how has she behaved throughout this book? She's 100% Rodder. And so it might not be a big surprise to us. It might be a surprise to us that Mordred was even allowed to become one of the Knights of the Round Table, considering what his mom was up to all the time. So, an enemy from outside didn't bring down these knights. Sin brought him down. Sin brought him down. Just a second. Let me decide if I want to read this. Oh, yeah, let me read this. So, Sir Percival, he was the one who was kind of a hick who grew up in the woods and didn't know anything. And, he tried to pull the armor off that guy in one piece because he didn't know it came off in pieces and whatnot. And then he met that lady in the tent, and he just put his ring on her finger. He was out, and it says, a great lion came down to the riverside to drink, and as it bent over the stream, suddenly a dreadful serpent fell from an overhanging rock and twined about the lion's neck and body, seeking to strangle it. Then a terrible fight began between the two, only it seemed that the serpent would soon gain the victory over the lion. Presently the lion roared, as if asking for help, and Percival drew his sword and attacked the serpent, and in a little while cut off its head and flung it into the dark river. Fierce and mighty though the lion was, thought Percival, he was taken unaware by the serpent, and could not prevail against it, but must needs call upon me for aid. Even in such case was I, when the fiend tempted me, and strong though I am, I would have perished miserably had I not called to God for help. Percival is not the only one who has one of these experiences. They meet someone, usually a lady, a very attractive lady, and she says, oh, come in my tent, I have dinner, and oh, I can be your lady love, or whatever, when they've already pledged themselves to someone else. And the minute they say, this is a temptation, begone fiend, it just all blows away and disappears. They're each of them tempted. Listen to this. Sir Bors, he's also on the lookout for the Holy Grail. And he asks the hermit of Carbonek, how do you know that I shall ever come to the table of the Holy Grail? There are few of you who shall come to it, said the hermit, and you, Sir Bors, are one of them. Though you have done no great deeds, nor won undying fame in Logres, but for in purity of life, and not in pride of deeds, dwells that which makes a man worthy to achieve this quest. Here's what I'm wondering. See what you think. Do you think all these stories really happened? Could maybe part of them have happened? Yeah. I have trouble with this many odd things happening to this group of knights. By the way, we also know at the end, it says when the Battle of Camlan happens and King Arthur passes to Avalon, then it says the darkness came across Logres again and the Saxons took over. This was long before there were knights and armor and jousts or anything like that. So it's out of time. But we have all these stories about warriors. But what makes you a good warrior in these stories? What are the characteristics of a good knight of the Round Table? What do you think, Elliot? Chivalrous. And what does that mean again? Can you remind us?
Have courtesy and you're brave and all things like that.
Did we meet anybody in this book that's brave but not courteous, not gracious, not merciful? For example, what about that knight that kidnapped Guinevere? I feel like just saying the words, the knight who kidnapped Guinevere, is enough for me to give away the answer to that. You don't just go kidnapping people and putting them in your castle and saying, I'm just in love with you and I'm keeping you here. What about the invisible knight that goes around just killing people randomly? Does he, well, I don't know. How brave do you have to be to go around invisible killing people? Not very much. How brave do you have to be to go into Camelot and snatch the queen? Oh, I feel like that's gets bravery marks. But he's not courteous. He's not good. So you have to have the bravery and the skills, but you have to be good. What's the qualifications for being able to witness the Holy Grail being present on earth, or to drink from it, or to touch it? Who notably is a really good knight but doesn't get to touch it? Lancelot. Why not? Because he's in love with his boss's wife, his lord's wife. And that's not good. So you have to be brave and courteous and all of these things, but what else do you have to be? How would we describe that? Someone who's pursuing goodness and running away from sin. What do we as Christians strive to be? We want to be what? Sinless, but we can't achieve sinlessness in this life, can we? What's the next best? Holy, righteous, as much as we are able to be in this life, in this world that's fallen. So righteousness, holiness. Why might a group of people tell stories about warriors who are brave and step up to the fights, but the most important quality they have is righteousness and holiness? and they're taking a trip looking for the most holy place and holy thing of all. Does that sound familiar at all? Warriors, always ready to fight, because the evil might be around every corner, and you never know. You got to be ready to step up and fight. It's going to require grit and bravery, but not in a mean way, in an angry way, because the goal is something holy and beautiful and righteous. And not everybody's going to get to be there. What is that describing? It's describing us, isn't it? Is there a reason that we might tell stories about the Christian life as being warriors?
It's like we're fighting against sin.
Okay, because it's a fight. Is there anywhere in Scripture where we're literally described as being warriors? Do you think of it?
Galatians 6,
And tell me.
the sword of the Spirit,
Okay.
the armor of God.
The armor of God, the sword of the Spirit. All right? Put on the helmet of salvation. We are described as arming ourselves for battle. Now, granted, it would have been Roman armor, right? Not suits of armor like in the Middle Ages, because they didn't have that. But breastplate, sword, helmet, because it's a battle. And they want to go to a place that not everybody is going to go to. And not everybody's going to witness. And we've got to fight that good fight. And like Paul said, I fought the good fight, he says, when he was getting ready to die. I don't know that anybody, I don't think people were sitting around saying, I want to make up a group of stories about knights because I want to illustrate the Christian life. It's not that sort of thing. But if that's the most important thing in your society, what kind of stories might one tell? Stories about warriors fighting for goodness and truth and holiness. It's interesting. Now, did Arthur die? This is a trick question, isn't it? What happened to Arthur?
He was taken away on the boat with the ladies.
He was taken away on a boat to the land of Avalon, the fairy realm. They took him to where the fairies are, to be healed of his wounds, it says. And I think this is very odd. Among the ladies on the boat was Nimue, the lady of the lake, and the lady of the Isle of Avalon, and there also was Queen Morgana Le Fay, Arthur's sister. And then Queen Morgana Le Fay, who knelt at his feet, wept softly and said, "Oh, my dear brother, why have you tarried so long from us?" Anybody got an explanation for that at all? Does it appear that she's still evil? No, or she wouldn't be on the boat to take him to Avalon. What has happened? I have multiple guesses, but I want to hear what you think. What could have happened? Just because someone is wicked today, does that mean they'll be wicked a year from now? Before we're too quick to judge people, we don't know. Because there's always repentance. Maybe she repented. Maybe there's more than one version of the story, and two versions are mashed up. When will Arthur come back? Never was King Arthur forgotten, and always the belief endured in Britain, and in Wales particularly, that he would come again to save his land in the hour of its deadliest danger. that once more Britain should become the holy realm of Logres, the land of peace and righteousness and of true Christian living. It is my understanding that this is still a thing in Britain. I don't think they actually literally believe it, most people, but the idea that when we need him most, Arthur will come back. Did you enjoy these stories? Mm-hmm. If not, why not, do you think? If they put you off, why do you think they put you off?
Just because of all like the names, it's kind of confusing sometimes.
Okay, it could be very confusing, and some of them have very similar names, don't they? That always makes it difficult. I will give you a little hint that I use when you're reading a book, especially if it's a pretty big book and it has a lot of people in it. I like to keep a little outline and a journal, and I write down the names of the characters. And so sometimes if I'm reading a very long book, I'm reading a very, very long book with a group of people right now. It's like 800 pages long, and it's crazy. It's got a lot of people in it. But if you keep a list of the characters, then if you get interrupted, you know, and you can't read for a week or two, and then you come back and start reading again, you can just go back over the list in the summaries. That sometimes helps. Well, I hope you will revisit Arthur again. And I hope you enjoy the first 6 stories of the Chaucer Storybook. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I will see you in 2 weeks.